John chapter 15, and I'm going to begin with verse 18, just two short verses. If you remember, Jesus is in the last day of his life now. Things we say in our last moments of life are important. In fact, legally, those utterances carry the weight of law in a courtroom if the person then dies later, and that carries in because it's considered to carry that much weight. John chapter 15, verse 18 and 19. If the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. For if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world, and that is why the world hates you. Our video last Sunday, 2 Sundays ago on Sunday school, was an eye-opener, I think, to say the least. Pastor Khan tied the ungodliness that we're seeing around us to the shadim, the demonic spirits that have been active for millennia. And he called out very specifically a goddess known as the Enchantress that has turned spirit sexuality upside down. Spirits that are, again, perhaps more likely, taking over our culture today as they did millennia ago. Now, in all of this, we got to keep this in mind. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 6, and again, that's going to be our mantra in Sunday school for a while now, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Did you hear that? Even in the heavenly realms, the battle against evil continues to go on. Well, we have to live in the world. Whether we like it or not, we're in the military. We were drafted. We weren't invited. Well, actually, we were. We were asked to give our lives to Christ, with most of us not understanding what that really meant until we were already in the army, if you will. So how do the demonic spirits that we address respond to us? In the Gospel of Luke, I think we find a suggestion. I'm in Luke chapter 4. In the synagogue, verse 33, by the way, Luke 4:33, in the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an evil spirit. Jesus is ministering to him. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Ha! What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, this man could have had no way of knowing who Jesus was, but the demonic spirit within him did know. They will know who we are. Cheryl and I have had occasions where we have experienced that we didn't know people, they didn't know us, but you could see the look on their face. They were uncomfortable around us. Years ago when we were in college in Tulsa at Oral Roberts University, a group of us went out to dinner one night at a pizza place. There were a group of others that were sitting on the table near us, and I could see them. They were no further away than from me to George, if that much. And I noticed the one facing me from the other side of the table had a goat's head emblem around his neck, which is a satanic symbol for satanic worship. And the longer we sat there, the more uncomfortable they were getting. I mean, you could see they were visibly getting uncomfortable. In fact, they were so uncomfortable that before their pizza came, they'd already ordered it. Before their pizza came, they got up and went and paid for it and left because they were so uncomfortable being around spirit-filled individuals in that same place. They didn't know who we were. They didn't know we were from Oral Roberts. They knew nothing about us as believers. But the Spirit did know. They'll attack us, sometimes usually through other human beings, just as happened here with Jesus. Now, this was just a verbal attack on Jesus, but the spirit-infested individual did attack other human beings that came to him. We're told that did in fact happen, that when they came and they tried to control him or corral him, we're told they bound him with chains, he broke the chains and beat up the people that tried to come and deal with him. We will on occasions address those or deal with those, encounter those people who are possessed, but they really aren't the majority of the people we deal with. But we do deal with people who are influenced. I want you to notice I didn't say possessed. I said influenced by the demonic. In fact, I think we could label much of our culture that way today. We look at much of what comes across the television now. The internet is a wonderful thing, but the most profitable part of the internet and the largest part of the internet is pornography. What God has meant for good, in some cases, Satan has now taken for evil, at least in parts of it. Today, I want us to take a few moments and look at the foundation for the issues that we're going to deal with. And I want to address a way for us to deal with them from a biblical perspective, from a biblical standpoint. And for that, with that, we're going to look at what the early church did, because they address the same issues that we have to address today. The reality is this: if you look at it and you take a close look at the early church, where the culture we live in is more and more resembling the culture that first century church after Jesus' death and resurrection had to deal with. Here's some of the things they had to struggle with. No moral compass, that is, no standard of right or wrong. Multiple gods were worshipped. Sexual license, that is, everything, whatever you wanted to do went. Homosexuality was rife in the Greek and then later in the Roman Empire. And there was little concern for their children. They were put to work, they were sold as slaves, they were used as sexual playthings, and sacrificed on the altar of convenience. Much of what we see today. In fact, in some ways, we've taken a page, I think, from those cultures, and then we've used the internet perhaps to magnify that and bring it literally into our very, very homes. In fact, let's look at some of the things that have happened. There has been attempts to decriminalize pedophilia, the sexual interaction with children. In Congress, there have been attempts, so far they failed, to lower the age of sexual consent to 12. To 12. And call that okay. But these can show us what we can expect in the future and worse. In fact, the next thing I think up on the agenda, and I've seen that some today, is polyamory. That is, multiple people living in the same relationship, 3, 4, 5 men and women together, calling themselves a family unit. Some time ago, shortly after the Supreme Court ruled on the legality of gay marriage, there was an article, if I remember correctly, I believe it was in Atlantic Magazine, that I read that said that was their next step up, that was to legalize polyamory and call that a marriage relationship as well. These are the things our culture is dealing with. Remember what Jesus said: we are to live in the world, but not be of it. And therein lies the tension, the struggle that we deal with from time to time. And I think the first thing we need to understand comes from Jesus' high priestly prayer. And if you're still in John 15, just turn over a page or two. John 17, beginning with verse 14. This is how he prayed for the disciples. And I think we could take that from a personal perspective as praying for us as well. John chapter 17, verse 14. Jesus says, I have given them, he's praying to the Father, he says, I've given them, I lost track. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. For they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. That is, we are still here, we are still in the battle, and Jesus has been praying. And by the way, what's his ministry today? What does Jesus do today? He sits at the right hand of the Father making intercession for us. That prayer he prayed for the disciples on that day some 2,000 years ago, he's still praying for us today, for our protection. And he goes on to say, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. Do you understand? We've been placed in a battle, in a homeland not our own, not by accident, but by design. You know, we can't really say, well, the enemy's against me, things are awful and horrible. The reality is the Father placed us here, each of us in the role that he's put us in, to fulfill a particular role for the kingdom. And I'm here to tell you the enemy doesn't like that. And if we're going to fulfill that role, the enemy is going to come against us in one form or another. It may be physically, it may be medically, it may be emotionally. All of those things come into play. Because the world and the world system is going to hate us. Jesus said that. But here's the thing we need to understand. It's not like the church created a utopia and then someone came along and ruined our design. We are genuinely foreigners in the land we live in. Paul tells us our citizenship is in heaven. We're just here for a time being. We are legal aliens, legal. Notice I said legal, not illegal. We are legal aliens, if you will, where we're living. And we have been sent. That mindset, we have been sent. Jesus speaks to the disciples and says, I am sending you out. And we have been sent as well. We've been sent from a spiritual perspective. We've been sent by the kingdom. We've been sent to the place where we are now. Some of us grew up where we are. We've been sent to the place where we are. The Lord has moved Cheryl and I around several times, multiple times in our marriage. We've been sent. And by the way, he never asked us, hey, would you like to go over here? That never happened. Because the reality is, when you're a soldier of the kingdom, just like a soldier in the military, you go where you're told and you do what you're told. And that's the role that we find ourselves in. Secondly, we need to remember that Jesus frequently reminded the disciples not to expect what I'm going to call warm fuzzies from the world around them. He says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 22, but he echoes it in Mark, it's echoed in Mark and Luke, all men will hate you because of me. Notice he didn't say they're not going to like you or they're not going to be with you. He uses that strong word, they're going to hate you because of me. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. To me, that says that's not a one-time event. It's going to happen over and over and over and over again in our lives. The third thing we need to remember is this, that we live in a land of darkness. And that has serious implications for us as believers. Talking about Jesus, the Apostle John writes this in John chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not understood. How often do we find that the world around us doesn't understand why we respond the way we do? The world doesn't understand if we act with integrity when they act without integrity, because we work from a different standard. We stand on a different foundation, if you will. We live by a different code of ethics than the world does. We have beliefs and values that we live by that we won't compromise. In a world that we live in today, but in which anything goes, what was it, the old saying in the 60s, if it feels good, do it? Well, that's almost become the mantra today for much of our culture. And they don't understand why we don't as believers. Darkness does not understand light. And here's why. In fact, in Colossians chapter 1, Paul writes this, for he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son whom he loves. That's what the Father did for us. Pulled us out of the darkness that surrounds us and said, you're special. You are my chosen ones. And brought us into the realm, into the kingdom of his Son. As a result, what that does, it fundamentally changes our relationship with the world around us. In fact, in 2 Corinthians, Paul says, what fellowship does light have with darkness? Have you found that sometimes there's people you're around that maybe you're a bit uncomfortable? They're doing things that you're just not comfortable doing. When I was in the business world, Cheryl and I would go out for business dinners or for departmental dinners, and they couldn't wait for us to leave because they were uncomfortable that we didn't drink. And they couldn't wait for us to leave so they could start popping the beers and pouring the booze. And I'm not speaking ill of them. That was the culture they lived in. And because of the choices and the decisions we made, they were uncomfortable around us because of that. Now, to their credit, they never tried to force us into their mold, but you could sure tell the sense of relief as we said, we got to go, babysitter's got to go home tonight, and we got to get home. And there was that sense of, whew, now we can really party because they're gone. The world doesn't understand us because we can't have fellowship with that darkness. But here's the other thing we need to understand. Darkness never drives out darkness. Light drives out darkness. You can light a candle in a dark room and see. The only way to make that room dark again, you can't add more darkness to the room. The only way to make that room dark again is to extinguish the light. When we bring light into darkness, it may be uncomfortable for us. It may be uncomfortable for those that we are around. We are still light in the darkness. Jesus said we're like a lamp set on a hillside. They get seen forever. And you don't realize, because we have so many street lights and lights around us, you get into a really dark area, one little light can be seen for a long, long distance in the middle of darkness. You don't realize how much we didn't realize. When years ago we were on vacation up in northern Minnesota, Wisconsin area. We went down an old iron ore mine. Literally, we were a mile underground, straight down, and then back in where they'd done all the digging. It was dark. They had lights on, they had light bulbs, and then they turned off the light. You couldn't see your hand right there. And the guide literally lit a candle in an area probably about the size of our sanctuary, I guess. And it's amazing how much and after having been in that darkness, that one candle lit up around. Now, you couldn't see to read probably, but you could certainly see to move around and see each other and see some details. Light drives out darkness. And that's our role in the process, to bring light to the darkness. So what did that early church do when they found out they were hated and reviled and persecuted? Well, that's the culture they lived in. They were hated, they were persecuted, they were thrown into prison, they were often killed, men, women, children tortured. I've read stories of women who were made to stand before their infant and small children and said, we're going to kill your children unless you, in front of your very eyes, unless you renounce Jesus. I'm not sure how you do that. I'm just not. But they did. In fact, most of those people, when they didn't renounce Jesus after the children were killed, they were executed as well. That was what went on. But you know what? That happens today in other places of the world. In our Western culture, we say, no, that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah, I'm here to tell you it does. Was just a couple years ago in a Mideastern country, and I won't call the name simply because, I'll be honest, I don't remember it. A young 16-year-old girl accepted Christ. It was in a Muslim area. The elders found out about it. And one night they dragged her out of her home. She was gang raped by the men of the village and then executed because of her faith. Because the world hates us. And that does, in fact, happen in different places today. In Philippi, we see Acts chapter 16, Paul shows up in Philippi. He quickly establishes the base of prayer. He finds some women by the riverside and connects with them and has them praying for him. And now he begins to go into the city to preach and to minister. And he's faced immediately with the demonic. A servant girl who tells fortunes, and she's following after him saying, this is the messenger of the high God, you need to listen to. Paul puts up with it a couple of days and finally gets tired of the interruptions and turns to her, rebukes the spirit, and throws the spirit out of her. And of course, no more. She can no longer foretell the future. And her owner is really upset because now his source of income is gone. And all of a sudden, the believers there find themselves dragged in front of this maddening, this horrible crowd. And Paul finds himself in prison. Right after that, you remember the story, God sets him free from prison. He and Silas begin praying, and around midnight they begin worshiping, and the prison shaking, the doors open, and God sets them free. So they go from there to Thessalonica. In 3 days, the city is rioting against them. I don't know that I would have wanted to travel with Paul, because it was probably an exciting event, but you never knew what was going to happen next. Some of the brothers then are brought before the city officials in Thessalonica with this charge. These men who have caused trouble all over the world have come now, here. What was behind all this? The Shadim, the demonic spirits whose territory was under attack by the gospel. And they did everything they could to stop it. So what did they do? What did that early church do? They did more of what they were already doing. They kept preaching, they kept evangelizing, they sent out more missionaries. In fact, it was persecution in Jerusalem that sent the disciples out in the world around them that was the beginning of the fulfilling of the Great Commission. You remember Jesus said, go into all the world, preach the gospel and so on, Matthew chapter 28. You know what they did? They stayed home. They didn't immediately say, let's start a mission society, let's take out an offering, let's go out on the mission field. Oh, no, they stayed home because that's where it was comfortable. So the persecution begins, and then they begin to go out in the world as a result of the persecution and literally begin to turn the world upside down. In fact, it's interesting that in less than 300 years after the resurrection, most of what was known as the civilized world, both in Europe and Asia, began to proclaim Christianity as the official faith. Literally in just something less than 300 years. They took seriously what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now here's the thing we need to remember. Gates are static. Gates don't come after us. If we're going to battle the gates of hell, that means we got to go where they are. And the promise we have is this: they will not prevail, we will prevail. Now, that means that Jesus expects us to take the battle to the very gates of hell. And that's what he began. He began that battle, by the way, with his baptism. You remember John baptizes Jesus. He goes off into the wilderness for 40 days of prayer and fasting and tempting, and begins to get into that battle with the enemy. He literally took it straight to the enemy's doorstep between the cross and the empty tomb. And now he expects the church, that's us, to carry that on as well. So where are we? Where are we? Where is the church today in approaching the gates of hell? Well, in Matthew chapter 24, the disciples have asked Jesus when he's going to return. And by the way, when's the end going to be? If you flip over to Matthew chapter 24, let's look at the answer he gave us briefly. Matthew chapter 24, beginning with verse 4. Because he was very, very specific. He said, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Christ, and they'll deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed, because such things are going to happen. But the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdoms against kingdoms, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and all of these are the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear to deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Where are we in terms of reaching all nations with the gospel? In fact, if you look at that, just a strict reading of that word, the gospel has now been heard in every nation. But if you dig a bit deeper, that's not exactly what Jesus says in the Greek. What he says indicates that every culture has to hear the gospel. And that's a little bit different than every nation, because many nations are multiple cultures within the nation. And so if we look at it from a cultural perspective, and by the way, an unreached culture group in today's missiology is considered to be this. Any culture that has less than 2% Christians is considered to be unreached. So where are we using that standard? There are 17,400 people groups in the world. That's what missiologists and theologists that look at those sort of things have determined. Of those 7,400, about 40% have not been reached, have not been penetrated by the gospel. Most of those are in the 1040 window. If you open your bulletin, you're going to see a couple of maps in there of what the 1040 window is. It is a section between 10 degrees north and 40 degrees north of the latitude, north of the equator, and it covers much of the Far East, Mideast. Many of those nations in there, or most of those nations, are hard to get into. They are in direct opposition to the gospel. In fact, many of them won't let missionaries in. So to reach them for the gospel, sometimes we'll have people that will go in as school teachers, maybe go in as businessmen. They'll go in for another purpose that allows them to get a foothold in the nation, and then they'll do what we would call underground evangelism, if you will. And by the way, if you will notice, there are some other definitions, if you will, of what's taking place in those parts of those areas of the world. Let me do a quick side trip and tell you what we've done that we've been a part of. A couple of years ago, we were trying to plant a church in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is one of the 3 or 4 most sexually sinful cities in the world. I mean, really, really, really bad. And we're trying to plant a church right in the middle of it. You talk about going to the gates of hell. We succeeded. We succeeded so much that the pastor of that church is now on the city council in Amsterdam. That was certainly never envisioned. And because he's on the city council, this church can now go into the city parks and have worship services where everybody else can see and hear worship of the King. Because of that, because we were willing, us and other churches, to take a bit of a risk and say, we'll put our money out there and try it. We've been able to put a foothold, if you will, up next to those particular gates of hell. There's another section that we're trying to reach now, and this is what I want to focus on today, called the Golden Triangle. And that's what the second map is, and there's some definitions there in that in terms of what the Golden Triangle is. The Golden Triangle includes Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, and parts of Vietnam. Considered the most corrupt area of the world. It produces 22% of the world's opium. It's got the largest meth production in the world, by the way. In fact, one meth factory alone in that area produces 10,000 pills an hour. Not a day, an hour. In Myanmar alone, there are 17 million meth addicts. Now, let me draw you a comparison. In the United States, we've only got about 2.5 million meth addicts. In this small nation of Myanmar, 17 million. It is a major area of child trafficking of children ages 5 to 14, both boys and girls. Most of them will die of AIDS before they're 20. That area is considered a place where many men in the world go for sex vacations. That's the type of place we're looking at here. These children are abducted with promises of skill training. And the skill training they're given is they're put in brothels, where boys and girls are expected to service up to 20 men a day. And as I said, most of them will die before they're 20 of AIDS. One of the stories that I got out of putting this together, one of our pastors who's a missionary over there did something a bit unique. He went into one of the brothels and purchased time with one of the girls. Now, hold with me, because he's not doing what you think he's getting ready to do. When he went in with her, and he purchased enough time to, you buy it by, I don't know, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't know, but enough time. And he said, will you trust me, and I'll get you out of here. He snuck that child out the back door and into one of our orphanages that we have in that area. Now, he can never go back in that brothel again because it'll cost him his life, because they know what he's done now. But he's done it with others and reaching these children one at a time. We have a ministry center in Bangkok, which advertises itself as the sex center of the world. Bangkok, they call themselves a sex center of the world. We have orphanages now with over 200 children that we've been able to save and reach. All of them were Buddhist. They're now all believers. And some of them are planning to go into the ministry. According to the law in that nation, when they're 16, they have to leave the orphanages. So what we've done is we've started, we call it forward housing. And we take these kids from 16 to 22 years old and begin to give them literal training to be able to live their lives. And for those who want it, we offer ministry training as well. In 6 years, we've gone from just six to over 200 trained ministers in that nation. Now, here's where we are today. And this is why I said, I want your money. Not today, but we want your money. Our world missions goal this year, our world missions perspective, is to reach into this Golden Triangle. And world missions is up front. We need your money. The suggestion is this: $1 a day, $365. You're going to ask me, is that each or is that per family? World missions would say each. I'm going to say, I'm going to leave that up to you. It doesn't have to be that. It can be less, it can be more.